On a weekday morning in Pretoria, Parliament went to prison. Inside the high walls of Kgosi Mampuru II Correctional Centre, in the C-Max wing built for the country's most dangerous offenders, a room normally used for parole hearings became something stranger. It was part court of public opinion, part political confessional. At the centre of it all sat a man in shackles, dressed head to toe in black Fendi, the famous monogram repeating across his clothes like a pattern of quiet defiance. The name on every tongue was Vusimusi, cat Matlala, the street kid from Mamelodi East, who had somehow climbed into the world of multimillion rand state tenders, luxury penthouses and whispered meetings with ministers, and then fallen back into a cell from which he now spoke to the nation. The ad hoc committee of Parliament investigating criminal infiltration, corruption and political interference in the justice system had taken an extraordinary decision. Instead of hauling the prisoner to Cape Town, escorted by convoys and snipers, they moved themselves into Kgosi Mampuru, turning a maximum security prison into a temporary parliamentary chamber. The risk assessments were blunt. The witnesses spoke of police officers on the take, of political figures tangled in secret payments, of a shadow network within the very institutions meant to protect the public. It was not paranoia to think that a man who threatened those networks might be silenced in transit. So the committee, guided by Parliament's legal advisor Rudzani Mfilo, opted for hearings under lockdown conditions, with security led jointly by Correctional Services, the Gauteng Security Cluster and the South African Police Service. For many watching on television, the first question was simple. How had this man, who once slept on pavements in Mamelodi, reached the point where Parliament now walked into his prison to hear him speak? The news channel cameras lingered on his hands in chains, on the designer fabrics, on the MPs scribbling notes. The spectacle was almost theatrical, but the backstory was anything but glamorous. It begins in Mamelodi East, outside Pretoria, in a house that did not stay a home for long. Matlala has described his childhood as a story of disappearance. His mother, who lived with albinism in a country where dangerous myths still cling to the condition, vanished from his life when he was young. Years later, he would say that he heard she had been raped, that the trauma pushed her away from him and into her own private darkness. My mother disappeared on me. I had to raise myself. I was actually a street kid, he told the news reporters. Those years turned the pavements and taxi ranks of Mamelodi into his classroom. He slept where he could, survived as he could, and still somehow completed his schooling in Mamelodi. It is one of the quiet contradictions of his life. On paper, the school record says matric. On the street, the same boy was learning a different curriculum. One that measured intelligence in speed, nerve, and the ability to read danger in a stranger's face. Only in the early 2000s did he find his mother again. It was not a storybook reunion. She was terminally ill, and the distance of years sat between them like another person in the room. Soon after they met again, she died. The boy who had grown up without a parent now carried grief for a parent he barely knew. Like many in townships squeezed by unemployment, he moved into what he calls informal business. He bought and sold whatever he could, small goods, electronics, items that changed hands quickly. Informal trading can be a survival strategy and a sliding slope at the same time. In his mid-20s, as he tells it, the police dockets started to pile up. According to the case history later laid out in Parliament, his first known run-in with the law came around the year 2000, when he was arrested 3 times, once for possession of suspected stolen property, once for theft from a motor vehicle, and once for motor vehicle theft in Brooklyn, Pretoria. All 3 cases were eventually withdrawn. The withdrawals did not wipe away suspicion. The official timeline of his cases, presented during the Kgosi Mampuru hearings, reads like a staccato rhythm of accusation and escape. In the year 2001, he was convicted of burglary at a residential premises in Seneville and sentenced to 4 years in prison, which he served. In the year 2006, he was charged in a cash-in-transit case and acquitted. By 2011, he was again before the system for alleged theft of a motor vehicle, a case that was withdrawn. The years between 2012 and 2015 brought charges of house robbery, possession of suspected stolen goods, common assault, possession of housebreaking equipment, carjacking, and more. Each time, the records show the same word: withdrawn. In 2016, charges of illegal firearm possession, impersonating a police officer, and resisting or obstructing police were also withdrawn. In 2018, even an attempted murder case did not make it to conviction. One conviction and a constellation of abandoned charges. For some, that pattern suggested persecution or sloppy policing. For others, especially the MPs on the committee, it raised harder questions about protection, influence, and the ways in which money and connections can melt criminal exposure. The Democratic Alliance Member of Parliament and former prosecutor Glynis Breitenbach confronted him in the hearing with the size of his criminal record, pressing him on how a man with such a history could present himself as a respectable businessman trusted with public money. He replied that he had done his time for the one conviction and that the rest had never been proven. On the legal record, he was correct. In South African law, a withdrawn case is not a guilty verdict. Yet in the court of public opinion, the pattern settled over him like a shadow. What came next looked, at first glance, like a transformation. After years of instability, Matlala says he decided to rebuild his life. In the year 2017, he registered his first formal business, a security company. Company records would later show his name attached to a cluster of firms linked to private security and healthcare procurement, including CAT VIP Protection, Black AK Trading, Core Kabeng Trading, and a health risk management company called Medicare 24.
In the name of Medicare 24 Tshwane District, not in the name of Medicare 24 Holdings.
Yes, it's a franchise, yes.
And when you applied or when you tendered for the contract, it was you in your name, and you were the sole director and 100% shareholder, is that right?
Yes, that's right, yes.
Through these entities, he began winning contracts to supply security services, and then, more controversially, to provide healthcare-related services to public institutions. Media reports describe him as a tenderpreneur, one of a generation of business figures who built fortunes almost entirely on government work, navigating procurement systems that are, in theory, open and competitive, but in practice often riddled with patronage and fraud. The contract that pushed him from the business pages into the national spotlight was signed in the year 2024. That year, Medicare 24 was awarded a 3-year health services contract with the South African Police Service worth around 360 million rand. Under the tender, the company was supposed to provide medical assessments and wellness services to roughly 180,000 police personnel. Internal audits within the police would later flag the contract for serious irregularities, noting concerns about fronting, compliance, and the company's lack of prior medical track record. Investigative articles show that Matlala allegedly received around 50 million rand in upfront payments linked to the deal, even as questions about how the tender had been structured were already mounting. By the middle of the year 2025, National Police Commissioner General Fanny Masemola cancelled the contract outright and publicly described the deal as an embarrassment to the service. The Medicare 24 contract did not exist in a vacuum. It was part of a wider story of corruption in public healthcare that had already claimed lives. At Tembisa Hospital on the East Rand, an acting chief financial officer named Babita Deokaran had flagged hundreds of millions of rand in suspicious payments flowing through the hospital's procurement system. Investigations by the Special Investigating Unit and journalists have since described a web of at least 3 major syndicates that allegedly misappropriated roughly 2 billion rand in funds meant for healthcare, routing money through shell companies for overpriced goods and dubious services. Deokaran was shot and killed outside her Johannesburg home in August of the year 2021, shortly after raising her concerns. 6 men have been sentenced for her murder. Multiple reports note that some of the suspicious payments she identified linked to entities connected to Matlala's business network, although he has not been charged in relation to the Tembisa scandal and denies wrongdoing. By the early 2020s, Matlala was no longer just a businessman at the margins. He was moving in circles close to political power. Investigations later confirmed that a former police minister stayed in a luxury penthouse suite at the capital Menlyn Main, a high-end hotel in Pretoria, in a unit owned or controlled by Matlala. The stay came just days before the Medicare 24 SAPS tender was awarded. The penthouse boasted a private lift, a 24-hour concierge, and expansive skyline views. It represented the kind of wealth that a boy from Mamelodi streets could once only have seen on television. Ali has since conceded that he accepted the stay, telling the ad hoc committee that he saw nothing wrong in doing so. Media reports and Matlala's own testimony add another layer. He has alleged under oath that the former minister asked him for 1 million rand in cash, and that he ultimately delivered around 500,000 rand in 2 installments. Transported, he says, in a Woolworths shopping bag he jokingly called his money bag. A former police minister denied extortion, insisting that his interactions with Matlala were motivated by an attempt to gather information on corruption, not to benefit personally. The list of senior officials around him did not end there. In testimony and in media reports, Matlala described meetings with KwaZulu-Natal Police Commissioner, Lieutenant General Kgosi, arranged, he claimed, with the help of Hawks provincial head Lesetja Sanona, who allegedly drove him to the meeting. At the time, he says, his contracts were drying up and he was seeking help to salvage the 360 million rand SAPS health contract. In return, he alleges there was an expectation that he would assist in persuading the victim in a police torture case to withdraw a complaint that was before the Independent Police Investigative Directorate. The allegations are strongly contested, and all the officials named have their own versions, but the picture they create is unsettling. A businessman with a criminal record sits in cars with top cops, hosts a minister in a penthouse, and describes himself, with some pride, as a man who can move between factions that no longer trust one another. While he courted power, his private life was heading toward a crisis that would finally strip away his freedom. In a case that would later be heard in the Alexandra Magistrates Court, a prominent socialite and actress was wounded in a shooting on the national route N1 near Sandton. Gunmen opened fire on her vehicle, injuring her in the foot and leaving a female passenger with a serious spinal injury. By mid-year 2025, after what police described as a high-profile investigation, Matlala was arrested in Midrand along with several co-accused. The charges against him include attempted murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and money laundering. Co-accused include his wife, Tsakani Matlala, who has been granted bail on strict conditions, and associates named in court documents as Musa Kekana and Floyd Mabusela. According to some court records, he was arrested in May of that year, while later summaries speak of an August arrest. What is clear is that by the time Parliament moved into Kgosi Mampuru, he was in custody as an awaiting trial prisoner, not a convicted offender on these new charges. He pleads not guilty and remains presumed innocent in law. Life inside Kgosi Mampuru has not been uneventful. In July of the year 2025, during a surprise raid led by the Correctional Services National Commissioner, officials found him in possession of a cell phone. The device was handed to the South African Police Service for investigation, and Matlala was reclassified as a high-risk inmate and moved into the C-Max section. In a written reply to Parliament, Correctional Services Minister Pieter Groenewald said that an internal investigation could not point to any responsible party other than Matlala himself, and that his case had prompted stricter search protocols and tighter control over what officials and inmates are allowed to carry inside the centre. The incident raised obvious questions. Telephones, in the hands of a man accused of orchestrating a network of corruption and violence, are not neutral tools. In a system already under strain, the discovery contributed to a sense that this prisoner was not like most others, that he remained plugged into networks beyond the walls. By the time the ad hoc committee arrived at Kgosi Mampuru for its historic sitting, Matlala was both a criminal suspect and a sought-after witness. The committee itself was born from explosive allegations by Lieutenant General Kgosi, who had told Parliament that elements of the South African Police Service had been infiltrated by criminal syndicates and that there existed what he described as a Big Five cartel of businessmen and officials. The committee's terms of reference stretch across allegations of criminal infiltration, corruption, and political interference in the justice system, including the work of elite crime-fighting units and the handling of politically sensitive cases. Key witnesses include violence monitor Mary de Haas, forensic investigator Paul O'Sullivan, and senior police and political figures. In that context, bringing a central alleged player like Matlala into the room, even in handcuffs, was both a risk and a necessity. The images from day one of his testimony have already become part of South Africa's political archive. A man chained at the ankles, his wrists bound, his head shaved, sitting upright in a designer Fendi suit. A day earlier, he had appeared in Burberry, drawing criticism and fascination in equal measure. He is 49 years old, but there is a street hardness in his posture that suggests someone who still expects an ambush. He called on God while taking his oath. He acknowledged his burglary conviction from 2001, and he did not deny his past arrests, but he rejected the idea that he is a cartel boss or a killer. Instead, he framed himself as a businessman, attacked by rivals and betrayed by the same police who once courted him. He told stories of raids on his home in Waterkloof, of blue light cavalcades, of cash in bags and favours traded in quiet corners of luxury hotels. Beneath the drama of designer clothes and sharp exchanges with MPs lies a deeper question about the country itself. A boy abandoned in Mamelodi becomes a man shaping parts of the police healthcare system, then a defendant in an attempted murder case, then a witness whose words can shake the careers of ministers. It is tempting to treat his story as a one-off, a morality tale about a single individual who flew too close to power. The facts suggest something else. The Tembisa hospital scandal, in which the Special Investigating Unit has identified billions in irregular expenditure and a network of front companies, shows a state procurement system that can be systematically captured. The murder of Babita Deokaran, killed after flagging suspicious payments, demonstrates how those who try to stop the looting can pay with their lives. The ad hoc committee, sitting in a prison to hear a prisoner speak about ministers and generals, is a visual admission that the line between the state and its supposed enemies has blurred. In Matlala's own life, that blur is stark. He built companies that, on paper, offered health risk management and security services, but investigators argue that some of them existed mainly as vehicles to capture tenders, with technical work outsourced while profits flowed elsewhere. He cultivated relationships that gave him both protection and leverage. A minister stays in his penthouse. A top cop takes his calls. A tender committee member later joins a firm that benefited from the very contract she helped approve. When the tide turned, those same networks became part of the case against him, with allegations that he used his businesses to launder money, pay bribes, and fund violent crimes. He insists that he is being sacrificed to protect bigger figures, that he is a convenient villain in a narrative that helps institutions clean their own image, without addressing the system that created him. There is no final verdict in this story yet. The attempted murder and conspiracy charges must still be tested in court. The allegations of bribery, fronting and collusion in the SAPS health tender will move through commissions, disciplinary hearings and criminal dockets for years. The ad hoc committee will file a report that may reshape oversight and law enforcement structures. In the meantime, Vusimusi cat Matlala remains in a cell in Kgosi, Mampuru C-Max, a high-risk inmate who once handled sums that most South Africans will never see, moving through a world where influence could open locked doors as easily as master keys. His journey from a child sleeping on pavements in Mamelodi to a businessman in Burberry facing MPs inside a maximum security prison is more than a personal saga. It is a mirror. In that mirror, a country can see the long shadow of poverty that pushes children into survival economies, the lure of tender wealth in a state heavy with contracts, the corrosion that starts when power is treated as a commodity to be bought in cash. It also reflects the courage and cost of those who resist, from whistleblowers like Babita Deokaran to investigators who follow money trails through thousands of invoices. Somewhere between these worlds sits Cat Matlala, a man shaped by abandonment and opportunity, by crime and ambition, by a state that failed him as a child and later fed his businesses. Whether history remembers him as kingpin, scapegoat, or something more complicated will depend not only on his trials, but on whether South Africa can repair the systems that allowed a street cat to stalk the heart of its institutions.